You're about to experience Healthline, a show where doctors from 𝗛𝗲𝗵𝗹 interact with you for a healthy, uplifting lifestyle. Moderated by Nicole Jacinto. You've got questions, we've got answers. So welcome to Healthline.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to Healthline with 𝗛𝗲𝗵𝗹. I'm your host, Nicole Jacinto. I would just like to greet everybody a belated Happy Mother's Day, or actually, it's still Mother's Day in other parts of the world, where people do watch us either live or they watch the show on Facebook or YouTube. If you haven't subscribed to Radyo Bandido YouTube yet, go ahead and click it. It's free. There are a lot of shows here, and Healthline with 𝗛𝗲𝗵𝗹 can be viewed on that over and over again, as well as on Facebook. But we are live on radio right now, DZRJ 8:10 a.m., Radyo Bandido, here in Metro Manila. And we're also live on our channels, on our Radyo Bandido TV channels. And that depends on the location, of course. But if you're watching, you already know that. Okay, thanks, everybody. And today, our topic is brain bypass surgery. Now, what is that? We often hear of heart bypass surgery. So today, we're going to talk about brain bypass surgery. And our guest for today is Dr. 𝗛𝗲𝗵𝗹𝗁. He's a cerebrovascular surgeon. So when we hear the word cerebro, that's like the brain, and vascular, veins. And he was going to tell us all about brain bypass surgery. Good afternoon, doctor. Welcome to the show.
Hi, good afternoon, Nicole. Thank you for having me here. Belated Mother's Day to everyone.
Yeah, it's our pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you for joining us and giving your time and effort to explain to us what what you do, brain bypass surgery, and for sharing your knowledge with so many of the viewers who actually have so many questions. So thank you for that, doctor. I know you're a busy guy, and we always appreciate it when you do take the time out to join us on the show. Okay, so Dr. 𝗛𝗲𝗹, can I ask you first, what is brain bypass surgery? Like maybe just a bit of the description to start off?
Well, it's a very technical procedure, but actually you did a very good introduction about it. When you told me about something about the heart, it's really something similar to that, but we're doing it in the brain. So in the scale of things, it's in a very much more smaller scale, because the blood vessels in the brain are a bit way smaller than the heart. So when we talk about brain bypass, what do we need to bypass in the first place, right? So when we talk about brain bypass, we actually think about two things. It's either we add flow to certain areas of the brain, so we call it flow augmentation, or number two, we call it flow reconstitution. So the second definition, which is flow reconstitution, is like adjusting the flow inside the house. So when I talk to my patients, I try to simplify them like this. Being a cerebrovascular neurosurgeon, I told them, I'm just a tubero of the brain. So basically, I fix the pipes inside the brain. So it kind of works in a similar fashion. So if there is a block in the pipeline, so we cannot actually replace the pipes because the blood vessels in our brain is something permanent. So what we do is something to identify which areas need flow. So we, in a way, we suture, we add flow to that target area. So that's how brain bypass works. Now the question is, why?
Yes. Can you tell us how important? So we're talking about blood vessels here and blood flow to the brain. Can you just tell us, it may seem like such an elementary question, but why is blood flow to the brain so important? Right?
Yes,
Can you talk about that a little bit, doctor?
I think when we talk about blood flow to the brain, it's really hard to not take away stroke from it. So sometimes many people would tell you, if there is not enough blood flow to the brain, you would suffer a stroke. So we call it an ischemic type of stroke, wherein there's a blockage of the arteries. Now, it can be due to a lot of things. The diseases of the blood vessels, we call it atherosclerosis, or sometimes there are certain heart conditions where you have blood clots going to the brain and you have these stroke symptoms. Now, again, when I tell lectures about blocked arteries towards the brain, I would tell them there are 4 pillars going
Okay.
to the brain. So there are four important blood vessels from the heart going to the brain. And if we are to divide it into four, there are
Mhm.
two blood vessels supplying the front, left and right, and two blood vessels at the back, left and right. And actually, God designed it to be actually intercommunicating within the four in such a way that if one vessel fails, the other three can compensate for it.
Okay.
But the problem is not all people are gifted with such a complete circulation.
Right.
So that's how stroke happens.
Okay.
So if there is a blockage in a particular area, then there's stroke. But
Mhm.
if there is a low flow in that area, then somehow the patient is predisposed to develop stroke symptoms. Not if you would notice, some of your relatives would tell you, nag-stroke siya, but after for a few hours, it recovered. But you
Yeah.
have some patients that they would tell you they stroked out, but it's been like 3, 6 months, but they have
Yeah.
been the same. There's no recovery. At
Yes.
most, they are wheelchair bound or something like that. So there are many patients, a wide spectrum of scenario of stroke patients, and brain bypass attempts to address that because some stroke patients would respond to this treatment.
Okay, thank you, doctor. That's a great that's a great way for you to explain to us. So you did mention that there are four major blood supply. Are there arteries or veins? Sorry, I that
Arteries, yeah.
arteries, okay, from the heart that go to the brain. And is the carotid artery one of these arteries,
Two of
or
it.
two of
It's
it?
the two
Two.
of
Okay,
it.
it's
Yeah,
here in
it's
the
the left
front,
and right. It's the
and then
carotids.
that
Yes.
that goes to the front. And
Front.
there, okay. And there is from in the back, is that the occipital?
Vertebral artery.
Okay, okay, very good. Thank you. Okay, you passed the test, doctor. I'm just joking. The one who has to learn from you. Okay,
Yeah.
so that's great. So therefore, and as you said, just to recap, and please jump in anytime and correct me if I'm wrong, or you can add or anything that you want to say. Um, for many of us, or for most of us, if one is there's a blockage in one, or blood is not flowing properly to the brain from the heart, the other three respond, like they talk to each other, they can make up for it. But some people it doesn't happen that way, and these are usually the people who may be candidates for brain bypass surgery. And when you we can circle back, so you did give us like the types of illnesses, or like in what situations do you typically perform brain surgery? Well, you talked about stroke, no? Is that the most common illness or condition, or are there others also?
There are many. Again, we backtrack. We talk about two things that bypass can do. Again, it's to add flow, or number two, to reconstitute flow. So reconstitute flow is somewhat tricky because like what I told you, there are normal blood vessels. There are normal channels of blood vessels
Can't
going
touch
towards
them,
the
yeah.
brain. Yes, but there are some conditions where the blood vessels get affected. It can be a brain tumor. So
Mhm.
sometimes there are brain tumors that we call it invade, or kinakain nila yung mga blood vessels, and it compromises circulation towards the brain.
Mhm.
That's one. Or there are some brain aneurysms that are very large enough that it encompasses the whole blood vessel. So the common thing that you would think about the brain aneurysm, it has been like in mainstream media for quite some time, because
Yes.
some prominent people suffered strokes because of ruptured aneurysms.
Mhm.
So these aneurysms are usually treated with surgery.
Mhm.
And in some extreme cases where the aneurysm is very complex, that's
Mhm.
where we come in, because sometimes we need to sacrifice the whole blood vessel, and to prevent a stroke from happening, we have to make a new blood flow towards the brain. And that's how bypass works.
Okay, when we talk about an aneurysm, doctor, that is a vessel that is totally blocked and it's bulging.
Well,
Is that
it
okay?
may or may not be
How does it
blocked,
work?
but it's usually a bulge.
A
So again,
bulge.
when I talk to my patients about this, what is an aneurysm? Again, I always go down back to the pipes at home.
Yes.
So when
The
you have a pipe that is leaking because there
leaky.
is a weakness on the wall of the pipe,
Mhm.
so that's how it happens. But since our blood vessels are somewhat elastic or pliable, it doesn't leak right away. It balloons.
Bulges first. It
It
balloons.
bulges first. Yeah. So that's what an aneurysm is in a nutshell. So yeah. Mhm.
Thank you, doctor. Earlier you mentioned reconstitutive flow and flow augmentation. Maybe we can circle back to that a little bit later. You did mention that reconstitutive flow comes sometimes from, you use it sometimes in cases where there's a complex, like a tumor or something that
Mhm.
that is blocking, that causes pressure or maybe blockage in the vessels in the brain, and
Yes.
with the flow augmentation, maybe we can get a little bit into that later when we talk about how you perform these surgeries exactly. Can I ask you, are there different types of, you mentioned two, no, but um are those the only types of brain bypass surgery? Like, is there only one type that you do? You said there's two kinds, but like, is it the same method or there's like different types?
Okay. Now, okay, let's go a bit technical, okay?
Okay, let's do it.
So when we talk about bypass, yes, the main idea is to put flow towards areas of the brain where we wanted to put blood flow, right? So the question is, where are we going to get that blood flow? So if we are going to be strict with the bypass, it's going to be from an external source, or we call it ECIC, or the extracranial. Intracranial, it's a very highfalutin at times, but I'm trying to simplify it. So it's either galing siya sa labas or galing from within the circulation in the brain.
When you say
So,
extracranial, it means out of the cranium or the head
yeah.
brain. Yeah,
So
extracranial.
minsan we use the arteries of the scalp,
Mhm. And
or
the
sometimes we get an artery elsewhere in the body from the hand or the chest, then we try to put it inside the brain.
Okay. So
So
basically you would like sort of harvest something from
yes, we
another
harvest it.
body part. You harvest a vein or an artery.
Mm-hmm.
And later when we talk about the surgery, but do you do this at the same time or is it a different process? When you
Same
perform
time.
at the same time. Okay. So
Yeah.
at least better for patients to know that you don't have to go in twice. Well, I
Ah,
guess if
yes.
you do,
If
if you went in once and you took that out, then it's dead already. I
yeah.
mean, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So thank you, doctor. As I want to talk about your tubero comment a bit because
Mm-hmm.
I guess that really gets to the heart of it and explains it to us as non-medical professionals and people who didn't study like you and who don't practice
Mm-hmm.
vascular surgery like you. So it's such a great analogy that you think of the blood vessels in the brain as pipes, probably also the heart, no, where blood needs to flow.
Yes.
Like in your house, the water, let's think of that. You need
Yes.
water, we need blood all over our body. And
Yes.
um and what you do is you come in and fix it, and you can't remove those pipes. Like as if in your house they're old, they're
Yeah,
there
you
or
cannot change them.
young. Yeah,
Yes. You cannot.
you can take them out. What you do is like you make a way for, let's say there's a block in one part of the tube,
Mm.
and then you make a way for the blood to pass from the part that's not yet blocked to the other part that's also not blocked. So that is the
Yes.
bypass that we're talking about. Did I get it
Yes.
right? Am I understanding it correctly?
Yes.
Okay, thank you,
That's
doctor.
it.
All right. So, just want to ask you, doctor, is there any demographic for the type of illnesses that you encounter for people who need brain bypass surgery? Like, is it mostly women, younger, older? Is there in your experience, have you encountered any like can you sort of see a pattern? Is there a demographic for people who wouldn't probably be good candidates for this type of surgery?
Okay. Well, for demographics, the youngest that I operated on for a bypass was a 4-year-old patient.
Wow,
Okay,
okay.
that's the youngest, and it's a different kind of disease. It's a genetic type of disease. We call it moya moya, but again,
Yeah.
we can talk about it for another hour or two just for that particular disease, which is a bit rare in Southeast Asians, even so Filipinos. The oldest patient that I did the bypass procedure is a 79-year-old lady who had a very complex aneurysm. So For me, when it comes to demographics, it's not really the age because it's really the condition that would warrant they would respond to a bypass. So most of the screening procedures that I do would be MRI, a brain MRI, a CT scan. So we have to check that as the initial imaging. So sometimes we would see silent strokes among these patients because it's the most common. I mean, strokes are really the most common
Someone
brain
really don't know it,
conditions.
no? Like
Yeah,
the patient doesn't even feel it, and the people around the patient sometimes cannot really tell. Can you talk
yes.
about some of the symptoms let's say stroke or other illnesses that and conditions that end up somehow that patient when like when they see these symptoms and they go to a doctor, how do they end up with you? I guess just some of the symptoms so that we're
Okay.
more aware.
Well, I think for making this I mean our show a bit
Yes.
much more focused to the people, I think it would be nice if we could focus on stroke because even
Yeah.
though there are some conditions that would warrant bypass surgery, it's a bit more complex and I don't think an hour and a half of the show is going to
Yeah.
justify it. And
Yes.
maybe I think stroke is the best because this is something that many people can relate to.
Yes, it
So
happens than we think, and you're right. Many Filipinos like na-stroke pala siya. We've gotten strokes we don't know, and it happens with young or relatively
yes.
young as well as older people. So, okay, doctor.
Yeah, and usually that's the one that strikes closer to home because
Yes.
maybe majority of especially our health conscious individuals would
Mm.
be afraid of a stroke because maybe they would know someone, maybe from work or family, who had experienced such a stroke. So when we talk about brain bypass for stroke patients, I would usually paint a picture of three patients. When you
Okay.
talk about three patients and having a stroke, the first patient would have a stroke and would somehow miraculously recover after the stroke episode. They would sometimes appear as parang hindi na stroke.
Yes.
Would have this certain group of people, number two, who would have a stroke and would have a permanent deficit. Ibig sabihin, there's a permanent deformity, a permanent disability. And
Mhm.
the third group of people wherein they had a stroke and despite multiple treatments, they
Mhm.
still keep having a stroke.
Yes.
So if we were to summarize these three people, the patients that are in the second or third scenario are the most likely to respond with bypass surgery
Okay. Yes.
because these are the patients that tend to get worse or don't improve with time despite the best medical therapy.
Mhm.
So we have to identify it, and our neurologists, especially in Makati Med, are well aware of it. So if they have stroke patients that somehow appear to have a pattern in the
Yes.
second or third scenario that I told you, they
Mhm.
would see me and they would be referred to me, and I would request some imaging tests. Actually, very two important tests. So the first one would be a CT scan or a perfusion CT scan. Again, this is also available in Makati Med. It's also like a CT scan, but it measures blood flow to the brain. It measures the amount of blood running to the brain. So there are somehow perfusion parameters. So we know kung ano ba yung critical blood that's going to certain areas of the brain.
So in Makati Med, okay, we're talking about, just to recap, there are three, you kind of group people into three to make it simpler for all of us to understand. There's the
Yeah.
kind of patient that has a stroke or a few strokes, and it seems that they just recover.
Yeah.
And they can treat it or prevent it with medication and other
Mhm.
things, some lifestyle changes. And then there's a second patient who gets a stroke, and there's a permanent disability that they get associated with it, whether uh,
Yes.
they can't move something, or you would say
Mm.
that part of their body is paralyzed, because we usually think of those things. I mean, we usually are familiar with those things as a society.
Yes.
Right, it really does hit home when you said that we're very familiar, or the illness of a stroke hits home, because we do know many people, and then they go to therapy. They also have medicine, and the first type of patient probably has medicine too, to kind of prevent it. Then there's a third type of patient, as you said, who keeps getting strokes no matter how much medication is given to them, or no matter how much treatment is given to them by a neurologist. Should always be seen by a neurologist. Yes.
Yes.
When okay, who has a stroke, go to a specialist, a neurologist. Anyway, the other doctors will refer you to that doctor. And for the second and third type of patients, that's when they tap you and your skills as a cerebral vascular surgeon and a neurosurgeon. Okay. They you mentioned the CT scan that Makati Med has. This is a special type of CT scan, right? Because
Yes,
it matters.
CT perfusion.
CT perfusion. Okay. Can we talk a little bit about that type of CT scan? Makati Med is one of the few hospitals in the Philippines that has this equipment or this ability.
Yes, one of the few. One of the few.
One of the few, so that at least we know that if we really want to check our blood flow, we can go to Makati Med to do it.
Yes.
So that we really check before this all happens, and we can tell. And when you do the CT scan for blood perfusion, how does the patient just sit there? Is there any way to prepare for that? Or do you put a needle in the brain?
With perfusion CT studies, we usually access the veins kasi we inject a contrast during that procedure. So the contrast that will be used will quantify the amount of blood. So let's say, for example, in this particular area of the brain, the blood flow is around 35 milliliters per minute, something like that. So when the results come in, we will review it in like a chart form, and the radiologist will tell us, in this particular areas, there is area of low perfusion. And sometimes that gives us an idea why the patient is still doing not okay, despite the best treatment, despite the therapy, despite of the best medical practice being given, they are still getting worse. So CT perfusion is half of the picture to identify na pag nakita natin that there are some findings like this, maybe a brain bypass is already something that we can consider for you.
So the CT perfusion procedure is something that you really used to tell when it comes to the blood flow. And thank God Makati Med has this technology, and radiologists and people like yourself who can read it. And you said, of course, you inject a contrast. So that's like injecting a dye. And then does it automatically go, where do you inject it? What part of the body? Just a vein in the hand or the arm?
Yeah, usually the vein in the arm here.
Yes. Okay. And then does it automatically, you time it, like it flows to the brain?
Yes, there is that our technologists are trained to when to shoot these kinds of the timing. So usually a very good image. So imagine if you were going to imagine what a CT perfusion would look like. It's usually CT scan is black and white, right?
Yes.
So with the CT perfusion, you have a blue-red color, sometimes green. So it gives you not just the values, but a relatively picture to identify which areas has low flow. So sometimes when we talk about blood flow in the brain, areas with good flow would appear red because it's very high, right? Areas with very low flow would appear dark blue. And so, this is a concern. This is an area of concern. Then the question is, would you need the bypass or not? So once we identify this with the screening perfusion study, then we will refer it to another neurosurgeon. We call it an endovascular neurosurgeon who does the catheter angiogram for the brain vessels. So I think everybody is familiar with the heart angiogram. Again, to check for the blockage in the arteries of the heart. We also have that in the brain. So a neurosurgeon does that again to identify the blocks.
Many of us are not aware of this, that whenever the technology is with the heart, because I always hear about heart bypasses, but brain bypass, wow, it's not something that I often think about. And yeah, when you say the angiogram, where they inject to see the blood flow in your heart, this is what's being done also with the brain.
Yes,
So
we can do it. Yeah.
yeah, it's not an uncommon thing that's done. It's just that it's with another organ. And as you said, the vessels in the brain are much smaller. And then
Mm-hmm.
they are in the heart. And if you can't really mess around with them. As if
Yeah.
comparing it to a house, you can't really change the pipes. You just have to make a way around it. Gumagawa ng paraan. Yung
Yes.
tubero. I love your
Mhm.
analogy because it really, really works, and it's something we can all grasp. Okay. So you talked about a brain MRI scan also. Is that a special kind of scan? And because I know Makati Med has like they have brought in, or they have new types of MRIs that are different from the older ones. Is
Okay.
that okay?
No, it's not just your typical brain MRI. It's usually a good screening procedure because not all patients would actually think that, oh, I think I need a brain bypass right away, right?
Yes.
So most patients would have a complaint that masakit ang batok ko, masakit ang ulo ko. Is this a sign of high blood pressure?
Yeah.
It's not really the brain gets the first one to be checked with attention. It's usually the heart or the other organs, the
You're right,
kidneys.
you're right. I
Yes.
mean, especially in our culture, like masakit ang bato ko, oh, baka mataas ang BP mo, So when we do get headaches and things like that, we get checked for high blood pressure, and they check the heart immediately.
Yes, they
First,
check the heart, but they
yeah,
don't really check the brain right away. I
yeah,
think there's a stigma because
yeah,
they don't want to get the brain checked because they're afraid that they might
yeah,
see something. Or number two, they're afraid because I mean the tests for the heart are relatively well known and well
yeah,
tolerated. I mean, if I'm going to test my heart, everyone has probably done this, the ECG, the 2D echo, and they're a
with
bit
smaller
okay.
Doppler flow. Yeah, the ECG. Just as a patient, you will lie down there. They will put a little bit of a like lube or some
The
lotion,
electrodes,
or
yeah.
they put the electrodes, and then you're done in a few minutes. No, it's that fast. So you don't get so scared of the test, and
Yeah.
we're all familiar with it. And then, as for the other thing, like the 2D echo, they again put some kind of lotion, and then they just move like what seems I would describe as it feels like a deodorant, a
Yeah,
roll-on
ultrasound
deodorant.
probe, yeah.
Yeah, and then they put it there, so you think, oh, okay, and then I'm awake. I don't need any type of anesthesia or calming thing for this. And maybe sometimes they'll give you the works, like run on the treadmill, and it just
Mhm.
seems very, I mean, it's been well promoted, and we're all familiar with it, which is a
Yeah.
good thing anyway for the heart.
Yes.
That, but when it comes to the brain, yeah, we usually don't do the follow-up and check it up after. Once
Mhm.
we once we hear that, oh, you have high blood pressure, or you need to, relax, don't be so stressed, which is like really hard to do. That's probably the hardest thing to do out of all the advice
Yeah.
that we get. It's important, but yes, out of all the advice that we get, we start controlling that. And then if we feel weird, we don't go to the next step. And I'm so glad
Yes.
that we're able to promote it on the show today, that Makati Med has the equipment to check out your brain if you're still getting those headaches. And, you probably be referred to a neurologist by your cardiologist anyway.
Mhm.
And that there are doctors like you that we can go to when, and get bypass surgery if necessary. But
Yeah.
you never hear brain. So I'm so glad we got to promote it today, and that you're
Yes.
such a
Thank
good
you.
speaker talking about it. And you have
Thank you.
thank you so much really for being on the show. Okay, doctor, we're gonna talk more about brain bypass surgery, and how exactly you do it, and all these things when we get back from this short break. Let's just take a short break, doctor, and remind people of the other services that Makati Med has to offer the public. So everybody stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Okay.
You're listening to DZRJ 810 AM. We'll be right back after these reminders.
Hi, This is Dr. 𝗛𝗶𝘁𝗵 from Makati Medical Center, and I'm happy to share that our world-class quality healthcare with the heart is now more accessible and affordable at Makati Med Care Access, Araneta City. What's more, Makati Med Care Access is the only single-use hemodialysis center in Araneta City. It's now easier for patients to avail of renal care services right in the heart of Cubao. We offer health screening and diagnostic procedures in this facility at affordable rates. You can get services such as mammogram, ultrasound, lab procedures, ECG, and many others. We believe that access to affordable, quality, and compassionate healthcare is a basic human right. And we at Makati Med Care Access Araneta City are doing our best to make this possible to more people. You can find us at the ground floor of Manhattan Plaza Tower 1 in Araneta Center, Cubao. We are open from Mondays to Saturdays from 7 a.m. to 5 p.m. and Sundays from 7 a.m. to 4 p.m. For inquiries, you may reach out to us at the numbers below. We look forward to serving you here at Makati Med Care Access, Araneta City. This is Dr. 𝗛𝗶𝘁𝗵 from Makati Medical Center, and I'm happy to share that our world-class quality healthcare with the heart is now more accessible and affordable through Makati Med Care Access at 𝗂𝗶𝘁𝗵. Available for outpatient care services, our 𝗂𝗶𝘁𝗵 site offers consultation and diagnostic procedures such as medical assistance, hospital admission assistance, blood pressure monitoring, laboratory tests, and X-ray, among others. This is really convenient for those residing in Makati and nearby areas who do not want to go to the hospital to have these treatments and procedures done. We believe that access to excellent quality and compassionate healthcare is a basic human right, and we at Makati Med 𝗂𝗂𝗶𝘁𝗵 are doing our best to make this possible to more people. We are open from Monday to Saturday at 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. at the third floor of 𝗂𝗂𝗶𝘁𝗵 in Makati City. For inquiries, you may reach us at these numbers. We look forward to serving you here at Makati Med Care Access 𝗂𝗂𝗶𝗁𝗄𝗃.
You're back with Healthline, keeping you healthy, moderated by Nicole Jacinto.
Okay, everybody, welcome back to Healthline with Makati Med, the May 15, 2023 edition. Happy Mother's Day again to some people. We're talking about brain bypass surgery, but before we go back to talking about that with our guest today, Dr. 𝗛𝗲𝗁𝗟𝗓, I need to talk a little bit more slowly sometimes.
Dr. GB is fine.
Sorry, Doctor?
GB. Dr. GB is fine.
GB, okay. GB,
Yeah.
that's cool. I'll remember that. I hope I can keep your number to maybe refer patients to you after the show is done. Okay, I just want to greet Tita Carmen Ignacio. Happy Mother's Day. Tita Carmen, thank you for tuning into the program. Napakadami mong fans, napaka-popular mo. Ang galing-galing mo talaga. Isa ka sa mga idol ko talaga na broadcaster. Actually, ikaw na yung number one idol ko na broadcaster. Thank you for giving me the time and the attention na makikinig ka pa sa show ko. I'd like to say hello to Marge also, and happy Mother's Day to her also. We have NJ in Honolulu. Happy Mother's Day to you. And Alessandra in Madrid. I don't think you're a mother yet, but anyway, happy Mother's Day to your mother. We have Susie in Hong Kong. who has indicated that she will watch the show after the live program because she's working right now. But see, there are people who do watch the show all over the world. And thank you very much for tuning into Healthline with Makati Med. And for the others, if you missed something on the show, if you want to repeat it, just go ahead and keep viewing it on YouTube or Facebook. Or your other, social media accounts. And also, if you have not yet subscribed to Radyo Bandido on YouTube, just click it. It's free and you can watch all these shows, especially this show. Okay, of course, we have to, promote our own, but there's so many other good shows. Dr. 𝗛𝗶𝘁, thank you again for being on the show. We're talking about brain bypass surgery. You're a cerebrovascular surgeon, a neurosurgeon in Makati Medical Center. And we had some reminders that told us, and I'd just like to emphasize to the people out there, especially those living in Metro Manila, that Makati Med has also put up different centers around Metro Manila, one in Cubao, they have the Discovery Permea, there's one in Makati, there's a few others in the area of the Metro. And this is really good because it's for if patients don't want to go to the hospital, you can make appointments there. They're open from Mondays to Saturdays. You can choose which one you want to go to. They do diagnostics. They monitor blood pressure. They have some machines there that you can do tests in. And if you want to know more about them, of course, you can always check it out on the website of Makati Med. And call Makati Med. And Makati Med has this service where they come to you wherever you are in the metro, and they can take certain tests at home. I'm sure if you really need a big machine or anything like that to do it, it's best to do it in the place. And they also help you with hospital admission if necessary. So, doctor, looks like you work with a great institution here, a great hospital that is doing its best to reach out to people and give them accessible and affordable health care, as Dr. Gia Season says when she comes out on the videos of these shows and explains to us. Okay, doctor, we're talking about brain bypass surgery, and we talked about let me see my notes here. We talked about the demographic. As you said, there's really no demographic. The youngest that you've operated on is a 4-year-old who was born with a genetic and congenital disease, that 𝗠𝗸𝗁. And as you said, an hour and a half wouldn't be enough to talk about 𝗠𝗠𝗁, but let's focus on strokes because a lot of it really does hit home. You're absolutely right when you said that. And you talked about like some typical situations where you would come in, where your expertise would come in, and you divided patients basically profiles into 3. One that may not really need your services because they had a stroke and they somehow recovered from it. But I have a question, doctor. Once you have a stroke, is that part of the brain dead already? Like whatever if it's a small.
Yes. Again, when I speak to my patients about this, I give them a short of part description where, let's say, for example, you suffer a cut on your skin, new skin will form to cover that cut. But for the brain, if it gets destroyed, it's gone. The brain cells there, it's gone. So what we're trying actually is there is some iffy topics about neuroregeneration,
Sure. You can talk about it a little bit now if you'd like.
Neuroregeneration is somewhat a highly controversial topic because brain cells, neurons in general, are thought of as has no regenerative capacity.
Like
Once it's gone, it's gone. The other neurons will just play a role to connect and just place just substitute the role of the other one. We call it neuroplasticity. So, but the field now is evolving. More researches are coming, and neuroregeneration is actually increasing its role, and some medicine to enhance neuroregeneration is already
vitamins that we take.
Medications to enhance because there are some chemicals in the brain that triggers the brain to to regenerate, and I'm trying to just tone it down for a non-technical way of explaining it.
You're doing great,
but not really going far from the medical explanation. I'm trying to make it simple, but yes, for explanation's sake, most of the brain tissues, if they get destroyed, it's permanently gone forever. They are usually replaced by the other ones that are not damaged. So the
Take
recruitment.
up the load of the work or
Yes, and actually, when we talk about strokes, I mean, the best way to explain this would be the strokes, the typical stroke where you have the manifestation of the stroke, either a slurred speech, a
Mhm.
paralyzed face, or a body. And you would have these silent strokes. It
Yeah.
would tell you you had a stroke, but you're okay, you're fine.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
because that area of the brain is not really contributing to a specific function. You
Mm.
suffered a stroke, but it doesn't translate to any functional deficit.
So it,
So, and it's detected with an MRI.
okay.
Magugulat na lang yung patient, Doc, I have this chronic infarct. And I didn't know, I was not hospitalized.
Yeah.
They would tell you that. What does this mean? They would tell you. And actually, that's usually one of the flags for us to start working you up that
Mm.
what are your risks to develop another stroke in the future, a symptomatic stroke,
Yeah.
as we call it.
Yeah, so it's good. So sometimes when a patient gets a stroke, it doesn't happen in an area of the brain where it affects the motor skills or
Yes.
fine motor skills, or as you said, like maybe facial movements, hand movements, leg movements, but or speech, like we're speaking
Yes.
during, and then they will just discover from maybe a very thorough executive checkup na, oh, I had strokes pala, and we don't know when this happened, and
Yes.
but it didn't affect those things that we usually watch out for, or the symptoms that we can see with with our eyes and our interaction with the patients. And then I also wanted to ask you, do a lot of it seems that a lot of people who are even very healthy and athletic and who join these competitions also just suddenly suffer strokes,
Yes.
so yeah. Okay, so there's really no demographic that you can pinpoint, but once a patient has experience a stroke, you can talk to them because people are so afraid of
Yes.
and finding out. You can make a plan with a patient. Neurologists and people like yourself can make a plan, and to lessen the risks of having a stroke again. Now, I wanted to ask you, doctor, you do brain bypass surgeries, and is brain bypass surgery considered a cure on its own? Or can it work also, let's say, like the final cure for something, no, for a type of condition, or to get the blood flowing in the brain? And or other instances also where a brain bypass surgery, whether it's the type where you create a new piping system, or
Mhm.
you just restore blood flow to that part of the brain, it works in conjunction with other types of treatment.
Okay. So wait, before I forget, because
Sure.
you mentioned about the stroke and everything. So usually I give you talked about demographics on what we
Yes,
know.
yes.
But it's really hard to talk about demographics because one of the increasing diseases that's been happening now is stroke in the young. It's
Stroke.
yeah, stroke in the young. My patients now that I operate on for a hemorrhagic or an ischemic stroke are getting younger. Uh, and it's not really about the demographic itself, but maybe the identification of risk factors. So
Okay.
I think that's the most important thing. I believe that one way, I mean, this show will promote what Makati Med can cater, but I think we can also promote health awareness with this
Yeah.
program
What are
because
the risk factors, doctor?
yes, risk factors. Yes, the of course the most important one would be a family history. If you have one family member or on your side, mother side, dad side that have a history of stroke, hypertension, diabetes, vascular disease, it's a good idea to have yourself just have a screening workup.
Yeah, like a baseline.
Yeah, like a baseline. It's a good way to just a simple measurement of your blood pressure. It
Yeah.
won't hurt. Just measure your blood pressure in the morning, at night. It won't take much of your time, but screening for risk factors is definitely essential. Because the treatment that we offer for stroke, the best treatment actually that we can offer for stroke is to prevent it from happening in the first place. So again, infomercial, patient education is the much more important thing, the much more important thrust. And number two, yes, there is a stigma that there is sort of that patients are afraid to diagnose the brain or do some tests for the brain, but every part of the body is interconnected. You know what happens to the heart? If you have already findings in your heart or in your blood vessels, chances are that you're already having some changes in the brain. So if you're having some changes in the heart, better have your brain checked. So
Yeah.
it
We
won't
usually
hurt.
don't go that far. I mean,
Yes.
we usually don't go that far. We stop at the heart and we, oh, not necessary to get the brain done. But,
Yes.
it's good to have a checkup, especially if you can afford it or think of saving to put your money there for that checkup, because we can sort of juggle our budgets just to get that screening that you're talking about.
Yes.
Maybe outlast for, how many weeks or months and then apply it to that.
Yes. Sometimes, yes, they are afraid that the test might be expensive, but the hospitalization, the burden with your work is much worse.
Exactly.
The
It's much,
expenses.
it's more
Yeah. So
expensive. Then you have to stop working. So there's another, not just the payment for treating what
yes.
something that could have been prevented, but the medication, and then the time that it takes away from your daily activities, the stress on your family members as well, or people who.
And some of the patients that we encounter, they are the breadwinners of the family. And the stroke is something very debilitating. So okay, to answer your next question, yes, most of the time, if identified properly, the bypass is a cure in itself. So like in particular case, a stroke, the bypass is actually the address to address the flow to the brain. So the idea is you won't have a stroke if we do bypass. And in studies in general, the risk of stroke for patients post-bypass who were properly identified to respond from treatment is much better. It's around 8.7% risk per year versus 17.8% on medical therapy alone. So that alone is already a good sign that if you're a good candidate for bypass, then your risk of stroke can be drastically reduced if you are the right patient to begin with. Yes, just to give you a brief background with history, the first brain bypass was done by a neurosurgeon, a very known neurosurgeon in 1967. In the year 1967. So relatively, this is still a young procedure. And during the late 90s and early 2000s.
Doctor, and who was the neurosurgeon?
It was a Professor 𝗂𝗂𝗁𝗂𝗃. He's an Israeli neurosurgeon, but he's a very, very one of the top. We call him a gods in the vascular neurosurgery. And in the late 90s and 2000, the clamor of doing brain bypass has been done. And actually, Philippines is no stranger to this. Our old senior professors, doctors have done this, and the results were not as good.
Okay.
The main reason was the patients were not identified properly.
Okay.
So right now, with the advent of better technology in identifying the proper patients, the outcome is much better now. So the stigma of a brain bypass being scary, we are trying to erase that. So we're trying to change that stigma because people are afraid. The typical Filipino will tell you, pag brain ang problem, 50-50 na.
Yeah.
And it's not actually the case. It's not actually the case. Our complication rate is much lower than that. We can do it at a much better.
And also for the Filipinos who are abroad, or anyone who's abroad actually of any nationality, if you'd like to travel to the Philippines and you're thinking of doing it here, at least you know that our rate is better. And doctor has been very forthcoming in saying, well, you consider that the Israeli doctor a god because he was the one who performed it the first time, 1960. pretty long
Yes.
time already. Like this technology has been going on. It's proven, and as you said, there was a clamor in the late 90s and early 2000s, and the only catch there, wherein the percentage was not as high as it is now, was that the patients who um who would do well with this kind of treatment were just not properly identified. But with the advent of experience, time, studies, and the equipment that you now have, it's become a lot better. You're talking about the benefits, and as you said, the risk is only 8.7% for those who get brain bypass surgery, and 17% for those who don't get it and just stay on
Yes.
like
Like
medical.
aspirin and 𝗂𝗶𝘁𝗵. Yeah.
Yes. And you did answer it. It's a cure. It's a cure in and of itself, because the thing is, I guess, is to really restore blood flow to the brain. So thank you for
Yes.
answering that, doctor. When we talk about, so we've those are the benefits. It's the cure, and it can be done. You've done a lot of it, I'm sure, in Makati Med, and I'm sure you have other colleagues there. And do you work as a team also when you do this?
Well, actually, I'm one of the few who can do it in the whole country. So, I think there are already some that are training abroad and coming back, and hopefully they can help our patient base in our country.
Yes.
Very few numbers in the country.
Okay.
So when I do bypass surgeries, I usually do it myself.
Yes.
And bypass surgery success is highly surgeon dependent, because the procedure itself is very technically demanding. There's 1,000 moves just to make this bypass procedure happen, and just one wrong move can have a domino effect, and it would cause a very bad bypass
I'm
and a
very
very bad patient.
I'm very glad that you said that, and you're very open about it, that it really depends on the surgeon. And you have the training, you're one of the few. So we can talk about maybe like how exactly it goes. And then for many of us who are listening and who are viewing, we've seen a lot of medical shows. And we see those dramatized medical TV
Yes.
shows, yeah, right? Where we see those moments where, oh my God, and then so there we do understand that it is dependent on the surgeon at this point. So you
Yes.
better go also to the right surgeon, the right place, a place like Makati Med or another place that is capable of handling this and has a surgeon who is trained like you and who does this. Do you specialize in it, or do you other types of surgery as well?
Well, I'm still a general neurosurgeon, so I can still do tumor case. But when it comes to cerebrovascular, it's actually my sort of my favorite.
Yes.
I really enjoy doing it, and it's really impactful. Lives are changed because of that. And just to tell you some of my experiences, I operated on a 45-year-old patient who they were already planning to have the surgery in the United States, because they thought there was no one in the country who does it, until they were referred to me. And they were protected from a very catastrophic stroke because of that. There's already this one patient that I operated on where he is already taking 3 antiplatelet medications.
Yeah.
And after the bypass procedure, he is already down to 1 antiplatelet maintenance.
Wow.
And he did not have any stroke ever since.
When you say antiplatelet medication,
The blood thinners.
blood thinner, yes. So things like aspirin and other medications like Neblit. Is Neblit the blood thinner?
Yeah,
Or
Xylostazol, 𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗃𝗃𝗃,
that is like, okay, I won't say na lang the brand names, pero
yes, all generics, yeah.
I forgot the Neblit, sorry. You should send some Neblit to someone who needs it. Okay, and then all these medications are to thin the blood so that they can pass.
Yes.
They can pass through areas that are clogged, either in the brain or the heart or wherever it is. But
Yes.
your patient that you're talking about that you encountered, they were going to go to the United States. They found you. They did it here. it saved the patient from another stroke, and it's now down to one medication when before
Yes.
he or she was taking three meds. And also, I mean, wow, you were able to do that and the patient didn't have to travel. Traveling is also a concern,
Yes.
especially when you're like, you could have a stroke anytime. Your family members are so stressed out. So as you said, it is life changing. It's so impactful.
Mm-hmm.
And the life of the patient that you save, I mean, it doesn't just impact the patient, but their family members, their loved ones, people who depend on them. So thank you for that service, doctor. I mean, I hope I will not exactly need your service one day, but
Yeah. I hope that.
I mean, if I know someone who does, or if I do, then at least I know that I'm in good hands. And I would also like to thank you for helping people with that. I mean, you're making such a great impact on society. The work you do is so important. And okay, so we've been talking about the benefits, no, of getting this, which is obviously it's the cure. It stops
Mhm.
you from other strokes. It's cheaper than going to another country to do it. What are
Yes.
some of the risks that maybe you can tell us just some of the risks, just so that we're aware, and we can sort of be like balanced in our in our
Yes. Yes.
understanding.
Yeah. So when we offer treatment to patients, it's always benefit versus risk.
Yeah.
So I offer this treatment because I always think that the benefit will outweigh the risk that the patient is going to undergo, because this is not a simple surgery, it's a brain surgery.
Yeah.
But it's not, I mean, for all the complexity that I'm trying to relay here, it's not really as complex as many would think.
Yeah.
So again, actually, you made the point na when you said blood thinner. So the blood thinner is basically pampalabnaw ng dugo, so it will flow through the blood vessels who are narrowed, right? So it doesn't really address the problem which are in the blood vessels. So that's why you're using blood thinners para mag-flow siya doon. So what the bypass does, why not just not thin the blood, but just add blood to that area? So that's
Yeah.
about it. You just add flow to the area. So that actually decreases the load or the need for the blood thinners. Now with the risk, we have this what we call the international standard risk for brain surgeries or brain bypass surgeries, which is around 1 to 5%. Okay, 1 to 5% risk of death or permanent morbidity, like the patient will not wake up from surgery. It's around 1 to 5%. But it depends again on what pathology we're talking about.
Okay.
Of course, if the problem is an aneurysm, it's a different mortality rate, right? If the problem is a stroke, it's another different problem. So it's usually when I give my rates to patients, the complication rate, it's actually tailored to their particular condition. But for the sake of discussion, the standard rate is around 1 to 5%. Now, that is the international standard. But one thing that I also tell my patients is my own personal experience. So I have done 21 bypass surgeries so far since coming back to our country in 2021. So I'm just a newly minted cerebrovascular neurosurgeon, and I have done 21 bypass cases in the country from different pathologies. And so far, my bypass patency, which means when I talk about bypass patency, sabihin, there is flow on the bypass. That's the measure of success.
Success rate.
There's a flow, yeah. The success rate for bypass for now is, knocking on wood, is around 100%. Maybe I got lucky or my numbers are still too low, but that's because my number is just 21. So it's hard to extrapolate data from it, but you can take 21 at any day. So, and I, unfortunately, out of the 21, I lost 2 patients for other reasons, other medical reasons. Yeah, not from the surgery itself, but it still counts as under me because I was the one handling them. So
other illnesses also that complicate.
yes, that are actually related to the disease but not the surgery itself. So in this group of patients, so I always tell my patients the honesty of that. So
Yeah.
I become transparent because when you offer your consent to me and the whole team, it's Makati Med being Makati Med, we are
Yeah.
duty bound to be transparent to our patient because our integrity is at risk as well, you know.
Yeah.
So we tell them the all of it that even though we are very good at what we do, complications still do happen. So I usually give this risk to the patient, and depending upon the area that's affected, I would have a personalized or case-specific complication rate. So the patient would have an idea. There are some high-risk areas kasi and some low-risk areas. So,
Is that
and
how you
there,
mitigate the risks by doing a personalized I guess workup and then explaining
yes, it somehow helps me predict kasi what the chances of it happening eh. Are you in the upper range of the complication or are you in the lower range? So if the doctor does that to the patient, I strongly believe that the patient would feel that pinag-iisipan or the doctor is really doing his best to give me the best outcome possible.
lang yung
So
na, sige, we'll just apply it to everyone the same
yeah,
technique.
it's not cajon like what I think of it. And yeah, it's a multi-team approach. Yeah, even though that I'm the cerebrovascular neurosurgeon, we have the endovascular neurosurgeon here, we have the radiologist, we have the cardiologist, the neurologist, or the other IM specialties and the rehab team that will somehow take the patient as a whole, not just the brain only. I told you before, it's all the parts are connected.
Yeah.
And they need to be addressed as a whole. So, and for me, it's not just the pathology itself. You know, at the measure for me at the end of the day is the patient going back or meeting the expectations, doing what he does after the surgery. I think
It's
that's an
quality
important
of
measure.
life. And as
Quality of life.
you said, so I sort of interrupted you, but the patient going back and doing what he does. So your measure of success also is the patient being able to do the things that they were able to do before the stroke or before the surgery. And sure, it may not be 100% that way, but they can still work and still,
Yes.
they have the power to think and to move and to do
Yes.
these things. So that is how you measure your success rate, not just like, oh, okay, the surgery went well. I mean, of course,
Yes.
that's the thing, the blood flow is restored, as you said
Yeah,
earlier.
that's technical success. Yeah, we call it technical success, but you know, the patients see it differently. I
Yeah.
mean, you could give them all the CT scans and MRIs in the world, but if they feel that they can still function from before, they still see the surgery as a failure. So
Yeah.
if you meet them midway and you meet their expectations, for them, they would already accept that as a measure of success. So I think it's very important that meeting with your specialist, understanding your expectations, what do you want, how do you want your quality of life to be in the next few years. I think that's the most important thing that we need to discuss.
Yes, that's great, doctor, because a lot of patients would need that from their doctors, the reassurance, and the doctors knowing that you're thinking of them in a personalized manner and you're considering what they want and
Yeah.
what they need to feel whole again after being struck down by an illness or disease or especially something like a stroke or what has happened to them. And a little later, I'm going to ask you about how they usually feel after the surgery. But before that, let's get into the meat of like, can you walk us through a typical brain bypass surgery, like from pre-op until operations first? We'll do the post-op later.
Okay, yeah. So the pre-op, of course, the patient gets sent to our clinic to be screened. So we do the test. I told you the angiogram and the perfusion CT and the MRI. And once we know that the patient is a good candidate for bypass, I would have a very long meeting with the family.
Okay.
I usually call for the patient, the decision maker, and of course the financier at most, because this would entail some cost. And I will discuss their goals after the surgery. And after much disclosure, we will prepare the patient for surgery. We will secure the necessary clearances, whether it be a cardio clearance or whatever condition the patient has. Then the patient will be admitted at the hospital a day before the surgery. Then day two would be D-Day, as we call it. So the surgery will happen, and the patients, if there are no complications, would usually stay about 1 or 2 days in the ICU.
Okay.
Just a very short ICU stay, then a couple or maybe 3 to 5 days after the procedure, then the patient is free to go home. So the surgical procedure that I do is, of course, I need to identify the recipient. Where am I going to do the bypass first? And of course, I need to identify the donor. Where am I going to get the blood flow towards that specific site? So after doing that, I will plan the incision. So usually the patient is under anesthesia at this time. I will plan the incision on how I will open the brain. Then we will do a regular craniotomy. Then after that, we will do what we call an anastomosis. So anastomosis is like we are suturing the blood vessel towards the site where I want to put the blood flow.
Okay.
So that's the anastomosis. And
Oh, sorry,
just to
doctor.
give you a scale, I think you are familiar with the Facebook post about a grape where the surgeon will suture the grape skin.
I'm not. Please tell me about it.
Yeah, so sometimes they would tell you that the training for a surgeon would require removing the skin of the grape and suturing the grape skin back. And you know how small the grape is, right?
Yeah, how sensitive the skin is.
Yeah, so bypass is way smaller than that.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Yes.
So it is like comparing Jupiter to Mercury. So Mercury would be the bypass. So
Okay.
when we do anastomosis for the brain, I usually do it under high magnification microscope.
So you're like
So
wearing this thing on your eyes, and then
yeah,
I mean,
it's like a motorized microscope, and the sutures that I use, the tahe that I use, are way more smaller than an infant's hair. Actually, you can see it with your naked eye. The suture.
you use as equipment for that. Like you have to learn how to hold the equipment, not just
Yes,
your.
that's part of my training, yes. So the suture is finer than an infant's hair. Actually, you can't see it with your naked eye. So the only way to see it is through the microscope. So it requires very, very fine movement because wrong suture would lead to a bad bypass. A
Okay.
bad bypass would mean a clogged bypass
Okay.
because we all know it would lead to a failure of the bypass because the goal of the bypass is to provide flow. And if not done properly, it will just block because the technique is not properly done.
Okay. So let me just walk through that again with you. The way to prepare that you usually prepare patients or that they get prepared is first, if they're a candidate, first you do the screening that's the CT scan. And for presumably at this point, they've had discussions with their regular neurologist and you know already, and then you do the CT scan, the perfusion CT scan, and the MRI. And when you do this, how long before the procedure should it be? Like how new should these scans be?
Usually a week before, but sometimes the decision will take longer than that. So
Yes, and then you have to do it again. Okay, because after that, part of your preparation, which is really which is really good to know, is that you talk to the patient and the whole family. You have a long discussion. You explain all the pros and cons, and you get the expectations of the patient. And you tell them you're very realistic, transparent, and the patient, of course, decides. And as you said, the financial also because it will cost some money. So that's part of the preparation. Do you ever have to bring in like a psychiatrist or psychologist because there's a lot of feelings there? I mean,
sometimes. I've had a patient before who is 9-year-old. He's just doing school activities, but suddenly he has to stop for about 3-4 months to undergo a series of brain surgeries to address the condition. I recognize that it will really affect. There's a stigma again on that. So sometimes our neuroscience division in Makati Med also has this psychiatrist that handles this, and the neuropsychiatrist is also part of our team. They screen them, they prepare them. So no basis gets uncovered actually.
Yes, you cover all your bases. And then after that, when it comes time to actually do the surgery, the patient checks in one day before, And then when it's surgery, they usually stay maybe 1 to 2 days in the ICU after the surgery. But come surgery time, you explained it, no, you're there with the team, and it's very dependent on the surgeon like yourself, because I guess you have the scans, you know where to work, and the first thing you have to do is decide what part of the brain are you going to restore the blood flow from.
Yes.
Two, sorry, and are you going to use one, I mean, you said na that you drill, no, the cranium. So you open it first. You open it, then you can see the part of the brain. Take out part of the skull. Do you have to shave the head?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Okay. And then you decide whether, once you see it there, you decide, okay, I'm gonna get this blood vessel or artery from the brain itself, and then just bypass the one that is blocked, or you get it from another part of the body.
Yes.
Usually, where do you get it from? The arm, you said?
Usually a scalp artery. Usually artery from the scalp.
So
I just put it inside. Yeah.
Yeah. You say, okay, I'm gonna get it from the outside of the scalp, and then so you cut it, you remove it, and then you attach it there on one end and the other.
To the brain. Yeah.
To the brain, yes, inside the brain to bypass, and then I guess you test it to see if the blood is flowing.
Yes. Yes. There are two ways we can do it. One is an equipment that I have. I have an ultrasound to check patency of flow on the bypass. And Makati Med has this, we call it the indocyanine green, or ICG. It's like a dye where we inject in the patient during surgery, and it glows during surgery. So if the flow is there, it will light up.
Okay.
So there's no way we can actually, it is what it is. It's already a clear measure of success.
Yeah. And then if it's red, you're like, yes, the blood flow is good. Okay.
Yeah, that one.
After this, you said no, the blood vessels are very, very small, the scale. So once you do that, do you cover it with a scalp, or is it something sticking out?
No, it's all covered.
So you cover it back with a brain bone and
yes. Usually we put back the bone.
Yeah, you put back.
We close the skin. There's a scar at times.
And then you do use magnifying equipment.
Microscopes, yes.
I think microscope. Okay, so I think a lot of people have seen that in like a lot of the shows that have come out about medical dramas where they operate that way. And as you said, that's part of your training abroad, where you use that machine and you use like other how do you say this? Other pieces.
Micro instruments.
Okay, so you're like, it looks like you're knitting in a way. Yeah, okay.
In a microscopic scale.
In a microscopic scale. And then you sew it, and then you're talking about the grape and how the train. Is it true? Do you train on grapes? Do you practice on grapes?
No. I train smaller than that.
Smaller than that, okay. Racing.
We have some, we call it synthetic tubes, or sometimes chicken wing.
Okay.
We suture on chicken wing, or sometimes live rats. We practice on those before we operate on patients.
Okay, so at least we know that you're very well trained. It is dependent on the surgeon, and since you spend so much time with your patient beforehand, the patient can have confidence in the person who's doing it. So that's the preparation. That's what happens when you go through it. So, to inform any possible patients out there, or any people who know other people who might consider brain bypass surgery, or who might be good candidates for it, this is what happens. And then after, you did mention that they spend 1 to 2 days in the ICU. Now, sometimes people freak out when you say ICU. Why do you put the ICU? Can you tell us that? And it's not, maybe there's a different reason for keeping them there, and it's not because they're actually critical.
The reason for ICU is that we need to closely monitor the blood pressure, the patient after. For such a meticulous surgery, the patient needs to be properly monitored. So we just send them to the ICU for monitoring usually. We need all these devices to monitor the patient, and that's very important, because the last thing we would want is a good surgery but a failed bypass because the patient was not monitored enough.
So something happens, and let's say, you've had cases where, we need to do something because the flow is not parang something went a little bit wrong after like I don't know, 20 hours, do you go in and operate again, or you check, or there are ways you do?
Well, it depends on what complication will arise. But usually the probability of bypass not working, we already check some parameters. Actually, there's a proper flow rate or size of the donor that actually predicts if it's going to fail or not.
Yes. So
So
you already know beforehand, and once you do it, if the flow is there, then that's it. But you are just putting the patient in the ICU to make sure, right? It's
yes,
the care. Because
yes,
of course when you say ICU, people, oh my God, ICU, and they freak out. Everyone
yes,
gets scared of that term because we many of us grew up and still have this idea that you're only there if you're
you're
like,
critical. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
But that's where, as you said, that's where all the equipment is. And I'm sure the nurses and doctors are always like, that's a place where they're always doing their rounds and constantly checking on patients.
Yes, it's
And
very important.
yes,
The post-op is actually as important as the procedure itself.
yes,
So,
yes.
yes,
How do you, okay, so you've told us like how patients kind of feel and like that sometimes, they need some extra help from your neuro science department, your psychiatrist, and you do talk to the whole family. So the recovery process in terms of this, there's the emotional component and there's the physical component. And you've described the post-operative care in terms of having them monitored in the ICU. And then are there any follow-ups or other post-operative measures that you take?
yes.
Okay.
So, when we talk about bypass, we always check what is the cause of the bypass. I mean, if it's a stroke, then we constantly follow up the patient for the development of strokes, number one. So, usually, this is in coordination with the neurologist because at times we need to adjust the medications in the future. So, we don't really start right away with a single antiplatelet. We usually gradually taper off the dose that the patient can tolerate it.
Yeah, do they have to, does the patient have to still make them stop taking the blood thinners before the surgery?
No, I
No.
usually don't let them stop it because it's also important to them, the blood thinners,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
yeah, and even though the patient is on blood thinners during surgery, our technique is a bit different, and usually blood loss for bypass surgery is very minimal.
Wow.
Really very minimal. Even though it sounds like operation for the blood vessels of the brain, it's not as bloody as many would think.
Yes, yes,
Yeah, it's
yes.
not as bloody. but but still we have to be prepared. So
Yeah,
blood products are prepared for possible transfusion, but usually it doesn't happen with my procedures. But yeah, another thing would be the presence of the scar, the stigma of the surgery scar. Of course, post-operative pain is also a problem because you have a large incision in your head, but we have a good pain service in Makati Med. We have a neuro anesthesiologist in Makati Med. So everything is addressed properly. So we try to make the patient as comfortable as possible during the whole hospital stay. So, it should be a pleasant experience.
And so do they usually stay, I think you mentioned 5 days in the hospital total. And then after that, when they get out, how soon do you make them come back and monitor them?
Usually after 2 weeks because I have to remove the sutures and staples in the head.
Okay, after 2 weeks, and then their follow-up with their neurologist,
Yeah,
or
well, yeah, the follow-up with the neurologist, and we will check again to do a repeat perfusion CT scan because that's the parameter that we check. Did the flow increase? That's the number one question. So the CT perfusion will check that.
how long after the surgery do you perform?
Usually it's around 3 to 6 months.
Okay. Okay.
And usually annually after the procedure, we will do a repeat angiogram just to check how the blood flow looks like in the brain a
So-
year after the surgery.
So for patients who get brain bypass surgery, what does it look like? Long-term care? Are there any further long-term care, and like what do they have to do to really get back to who they were or to the goal of who they want to be?
Yeah, so it depends upon the severity of the stroke during the time it happened.
Yeah.
So I think the important timing here would be 3 to 6 months after the stroke, because that's what we call the golden period of recovery after the stroke. So rehab is intensive at that time, and usually the recovery continues for about a year after the stroke. But most of the time, I would tell the patient, a year after your stroke, whatever your function is, that's going to be how it's going to look like. Maybe
Yeah.
there would be some improvements in the future, but not so much. So
Mhm.
you have to work on that first year.
In the
So
golden period and the first year, the 3 to 6 months after, and the
yes.
first year you have to work. What type of rehab does a patient who has brain bypass surgery usually do? I know it's dependent on the part of the brain and and
Yes.
how bad it was, but can you just maybe give us an average or an idea of what type?
So when we talk about rehab activities, we usually coordinate it with activities of daily living.
Okay.
So just a simple hooking of bra for females, you know,
Yes.
lifting lifting your hand so you can bathe yourself,
Yes.
manipulating the pen, the utensils. Those
Yes.
are simple things that need to be addressed. Now, there would come a time that if the basic activities are fulfilled, then let's talk about what do we need for you to go back to work. So if the patient is, let's say, for example, working a desk job, then we have to work on those fingers, the dexterity. If the patient is a teacher, then we have to make sure that your cognitive faculties are working perfectly. But it's not always the case. But we try to get as much as we can. Even though that bypass is promising in terms of improving the quality of life patients, it's not a panacea. It's not a cure for all.
Yeah.
Uh, it's not a miracle cure where your stroke suddenly disappears. So I always believe that meeting the expectations, the real, what I call this, reachable expectations, realistic expectations is important when we do these kinds of surgery, because if you don't have that communication before the surgery, I think there's going to be problem between the doctor and the patient.
Yes, that's so important. And, thank you for saying that, doctor. I mean, I think you're a very enlightened physician and a healer, because that's really what we need, apart from just addressing the physical aspects or the anatomical aspects or whatever is physiological. We also need to understand and accept certain things, help us with acceptance, and also, give us some courage to kind of fight to get to the best point where we can. And that is
Yes.
very difficult for a lot of people. But you do have a team that approaches it holistically. And I can tell just by talking to you on the show that you're one of those doctors who really gets into it. And that is so important. I can't tell you how many doctors I've met who just don't, you know, maybe they're also tired or whatever it is. Maybe they also need therapy because they care so much about their patients. But you are really right there on this. I would recommend you.
Actually, to add, Miss Nicole, ang sinasabi ko sa mga patients ko dyan, mabigat na yung problema to begin with eh.
Yes,
I
oo.
mean, it's already the brain. You have already, this is already your career, your future, yourself on the line. So then might as well, let's do something to make you feel better. And not
Yes.
just treat the disease itself.
Mhm.
Yeah, so usually that's how we approach it, actually. The whole
Yeah.
team here.
Doc, I'm just gonna read something from people who texted in or messaged in. Hi, Nicole. I want to greet my family in the UK. The Taylor family, they're watching you from uh Jetson. Okay. Okay, thank you to the Taylor family in the UK. Hi, Doc and Nicole. A lot of people said once na opera na in your head, minsan or 80% maapektuhan na yung ibang function ng brain. Is that true? This question is from Christine.
Yeah, that's the stigma I'm talking about. Brain surgery has evolved over the years. Our outcomes are much better now. Actually, grabe naman yung percent ni ma'am, 80%
20%.
non-functional. It's worse than 50-50, but
But it
it
is a
just tells
stigma.
you it
Very,
just
yeah.
tells you what people think about the brain surgery eh. So, we're trying to change that. one surgery at a time. We're trying to change that one surgery at a time. The outcomes are much better now than it was, 20, 30 years ago. The technology is there, the training is there now. And, Philippines in general is keeping up with the first world countries. Our technology may not meet head to head with the first world countries, but the doctors who are training are at par. Seeing Filipinos train abroad, we can actually go toe to toe with the international specialists. We can go with them.
Christine, thank you for asking that question. And why don't you watch the show again and again para makuha mo talaga na it's not true na stigma yung 80% kaagad maapektuhan. Hi, Nicole, always watching our show since season 1 from Jessica. Thank you, Jessica, and keep watching. I learn a lot from doing these interviews. I learned a lot today from you, doctor. Thank you for being on the show. Do you have any advice or any like parting words for people who may be who are qualified, of course, and who may be considering brain bypass surgery?
Well, actually, if I will leave a message, it's not really for bypass. For me, try to avoid bypass.
Okay,
the best way to avoid bypass is still, being responsible for your health. If you have the risk factors, try to modify them and seek some professional help on how you are going to modify those risk factors. There are things that you can do and there are things that you cannot do. So focus on the things that you can do to make yourself a whole lot better. You're not just doing this for yourself. You're doing it for your family.
Thank you, doctor. I think what you said applies to a lot of things that we can do in life, and not just about the risk factors for stroke, but so many other things as well. This has been a very uplifting discussion with you. Thank you for bringing that to the show. Thank you for bringing that to me. And before we say bye, is there anyone you'd like to greet?
No one naman. But of course, my department, neuroscience department, my section of neurosurgery, they have been supportive of me ever since I was a trainee. So the reason I'm here is because of them. So I'm just giving back to my mother institution, which is Makati Med.
Okay. So thank you to your mother institution and your department and all have supported you. And thank you to those who are watching. Doctor, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you for having me here.
Really, really uplifting. Okay, so folks, tune in again next week, Monday, 5 to 6:30 p.m. Manila time. But of course, you can view this over and over again on YouTube and Facebook. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next week. Bye, doctor.
Thank you. Goodbye po.
Thank you for tuning in to Healthline with expert doctors from Makati Med, giving you the chance to interact, uplifting your lifestyle. Moderated by Nicole Jacinto. Tune in again next week for your weekly dose of Healthline.
The views and comments